Hi everybody, thanks for listening to today's podcast on overcoming the difficulties in communicating innovative ideas. I'm Matteo Vanzini, one of the co-founder of Parity Network, a digital B2B currency based in Birmingham, UK. Parity replicates two successful European models, one based in Italy, one based in Switzerland. And as the concept is novel and innovative, it has received a grant from the Greater Birmingham and Solihull Local Enterprise Partnership to conduct market research and developing its communication. Parity has worked on this project with Create and Propel, and today we will go through the lessons we've learned. The following podcast is for entrepreneurs who are or thinking of developing innovative ideas. It provides insights on how Parity overcame its communication issues, and it provides also an overview on local digital currency that might be interesting if you're looking at alternative currency from a research or business point of view. Before we get started, let me introduce my co-host today. We have Stuart from Parity Network.
Hi, I'm Stuart, co-founder of Parity. I've got a background of implementing innovative ideas. I worked for the European Union looking at how to share innovation across Europe. I was also took an early interest in Bitcoin and was an early investor, thinking that the idea of Bitcoin was a highly innovative idea.
And then we got Courtney from Create and Propel.
Hey guys, as you mentioned, my name is Courtney Patrick and I am a brand consultant and founder of Create and Propel. And my mission is to help brands of all sizes and industries have access to strategic branding. So I should say, maybe in a nutshell, what I do is help businesses articulate who they are and what they do in a meaningful way that helps propel their business forward. You can reach me on a lot of different social networks, which I'll talk about at the end of this podcast, but just really great to be here and have worked with these guys on a great project. I'm excited to share about what we learned.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. And somehow, first thing first, what is the innovative idea we're talking about? We said before, Parity replicates two European models, both developed after a global financial crisis. We got VIR in Switzerland, developed after 1929, and Sardex in Italy, developed in 2008. So both of these two currencies are based on credit, and they both target local SMEs. Their ultimate goal, so it's to sustain local trade despite the lack of liquidity or the economic downturn. But in terms of currency innovation, Stuart, what are the other models available in the market, and how do these relate to Parity?
So, obviously, one of the main currencies that's most widely known is Bitcoin and their associated cryptocurrencies. So, Bitcoin was developed also after 2008 by a group of people who wanted a sort of a trustless way to spend money around the world. That trustless idea allowed the development of sort of what's called blockchain technology, which this allows the transfer of balances without actually knowing the person who you're transferring balances to. Bitcoin has had significant adoption around the world over the sort of last 10 to 12 years, but it's been mainly by financial institutions and investors. There's been a sort of general lack of uptake in small businesses and sort of the kind of average SME that makes up the vast majority of businesses within the marketplace. Also in the UK, there's other local sort of alternative currencies that are well known called sort of local currencies, which Bristol Pound is one of those, which was the largest, that sort of attracted about 800 businesses in the city of Bristol and about 2,000 consumers. There's also been sort of other attempts of doing that, sort of Totnes Pound, Brixton Pound around the country.
Okay, perfect. So it really didn't get into the market of SMEs, you were saying, and potentially one of the reasons why Sardex and VIR were so successful is because of that element of credit to support businesses in their cash flow, in their kind of financial tools. So Courtney, how does this idea of a local currency relate to financial services or all the innovation we are seeing within the sector?
Yeah, well, I think, let me just say here, if you are listening to this so far and you are not in the financial services industry, but you're looking at how do you communicate an innovative product, no matter what sector or background that you're working in, this is still something that you're going to want to listen to, because I think the world can kind of look at what's happening at financial services as a really good model for how industries are having to really focus on the customer. And I guess to give a little bit of context, actually my first job in the UK, because if you can't tell, I am not from here originally, was working at an SME challenger bank called Unity Trust Bank. And the bank was doing a lot of research to better understand what do customers want from financial services. And what I found fascinating about that, just to give some context again, for those of you that aren't in financial services, because it can sort of be an inclusive sector in terms of its jargon. But everyone will remember the 2008 recession, or at least most people will remember that are watching this video. And so what happened, certainly in the UK, but around the world, is it took people's trust away from their financial institutions. So historically in the UK, there was the big four, your Barclays, your HSBC, your NatWest, and your Lloyds. And if anything, what the 2008 recession showed us is that we can't necessarily trust those big players. And so it was a really big time in the UK, and certainly has continued to snowball over time, because what was happening is we have to have a bank, we have to have a way of distributing cash or transactions between businesses or companies and people. But if you can't trust that person anymore, and you feel like that sector or that provider isn't actually providing to you, what are your options? Because it's so important, especially to small businesses. As Stuart mentioned, over 99% of businesses in the UK are SMEs, and if they feel like there's no one on their side, where do you go? So it kind of brought on this innovation.
No, definitely, and this kind of like reflects basically a long-term trend that's been taking place over even 30 years, where small businesses went from a position of knowing their local bank manager. They trusted their local bank manager. Whenever they wanted advice, they would walk into that local branch and ask for advice. And we've slowly came to a position now where really branches are closing, and businesses, what they experience with the big four is automated processes. They don't speak to a local person. They don't speak to somebody that understands their business. And when it comes to trying to access credit or trying to access financial services, what they experience now is essentially forms. And unfortunately, they find themselves in this position where it just says sort of computer says no, where they're trying to access finance and they're unable to find that. And that kind of then has encouraged the take up of, like as Courtney said, sort of challenger banks, new entries into the marketplace. On a consumer level, quite a few of myself and a few of my friends have downloaded the Monzo app and the Revolut app, and it's a completely different way of experiencing financial services. And businesses are slowly finding themselves in that type of position where they're going to different banks and they're trying out different financial services. I think ourselves, and including a few of the businesses that we work with, are now trying Starling Bank, which again is a completely different experience compared to what you would usually sort of experience from the Barclays and the Lloyds of the world.
Yeah. And I think one thing that's interesting is that no matter what industry or sector you're in, there's this sort of, I guess people undervalue or think that a small business is just going to go for something that they can trust and something that's been going on for years and years, because they're too small to be able to have an innovative way of doing things. But actually you can be further from that. And we'll talk about how we found that in the research, because small businesses are agile. And so if they feel like they're not happy with the way things are working with their provider, then they are going to go to your Starlings or your Monzos or Adams or whatever banks are going to come into play. And so digital technology, and especially when we combine that with the economic environment that 2020 has unfortunately brought, means that people are going to move and they're going to find something that actually works for them. So it's kind of combining all of that together. And as a small business, what you guys did was really just create a tool that reflected all of these things going on in the industry, but bringing it into the local area that you served, which was, I think, really cool to work with a project that definitely started in that realm. And I know there's so many other entrepreneurs that are doing that in lots of different sectors. And that's why this is a good listen to hear, how did three guys actually go about bringing that to life?
Absolutely. And I really appreciate you bringing into the conversation some very key words to understand what Parity is all about. Because you mentioned trust, you mentioned personal relationship, the local kind of dimension of the project. So I appreciate in the audience there are not expert of complementary currency and people very familiar with this concept. So to kind of give a bit of a framework, Stuart, can you please explain what Parity is and especially how does it actually work for local SMEs?
No, definitely. So the kind of background of this was research at the University of Birmingham that looked at these different currency models. And what was a key thing that was found, that there's essentially sort of two types of alternative currencies, or two types of ways of thinking of money. There's this kind of commodity money, which the average listener will know that of sort of like gold bars and gold coins, and having something with intrinsic value that's in your pocket that you know you can exchange. And what Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and even Bristol pound, that kind of reflected more of that idea, where with Bitcoin, if you want to do a transaction in Bitcoin, you have to essentially buy it first and have this digital commodity, which you then can transact elsewhere. What was interesting about Sardex and these alternative currencies is that they use more of a credit-based approach to alternative currencies. So with Sardex and with the VIA, you don't need to buy their currency first, because the currency isn't a commodity that you need to purchase. How you access it is they give you a zero interest credit facility, just like an overdraft that you would experience as an individual, or like a credit card. And how you then spend that currency is by using that overdraft, that you can go to another business in the network and you can spend, using an overdraft. So what's crucial, and what links back to what me and Courtney were saying a moment ago, is what that gives a small business is it gives them a sort of a cash flow facility. It means that as well as the pounds they've got sitting in their bank account, they've also got this additional credit facility, which allows them to buy the services and the goods and things they need for their business from within the network. So what Parity did was essentially develop a similar Sardex and VIA model here in Birmingham. So we launched early in 2020, just before the COVID crisis, and we attracted 20 small businesses. Well, early in the year, we attracted sort of 5 or 6 small businesses to the network, gave them all these zero interest credit facilities, which allowed them to make purchases from one another without using cash, essentially. And slowly but surely, we started to sort of attract more and more businesses. But one of the sort of central challenges of what we were trying to do is how do we communicate this? The average person hasn't even heard of alternative currencies. They've barely heard of Bitcoin. And now what we were trying to do is take an alternative currency model to the market and trying to get them to adopt something that is pretty alien. And that's within a context where, as Courtney mentioned earlier, of small businesses generally just sort of distrusting anything financial, anything loan associated, anything associated with credit. The average small business owner tries to avoid it and tends to distrust these organizations.
Yeah, but I think it's just really interesting as well if we kind of look into that concept of how do we explain this, because I suppose even to take what you've said and boil it down to something that, again, anybody who hears alternative currency and thinks, I don't know what that is, so I'm not sure if I want to listen along. I think the key is every single business has things that they will need to use cash for. You will have to pay your suppliers. You will have to pay your team. You will have to pay cash for rent to keep the lights on. All of those things take Great British Pound. And so most of our transactions that we're going to do, or for most businesses, all of your transactions are going to revolve around cash. And so you've got to have that to survive. But the problem is, as a small business, what all of us will know from having done this ourselves is that you kind of have to spend money to make money, right? There's that old saying of doing that. And so part of spending that money on scaling your business is investing in things like marketing or a website or all of these other services. And unfortunately, there's a huge barrier to a lot of businesses to do that because, as you mentioned, Stuart, a lot of these banks are just not accepting loans for small businesses because they don't feel like it's a viable opportunity, even if it might be the case. So what Parity does is it opens the door and it puts the power back into the customer's hand, because it goes, so look, we understand cash is king and you have to have pound in your bank account to pay those people, but you can use Parity to invest in scaling your business by having transactions with local vendors that also accept that. And so I think something that we heard a lot in the research phase is people go, oh, is it like a barter? Well, no, it's not like a barter, because you're using Parity just like you would Pound, but you're able to invest in things that you probably never invested in before. And I think that's a really nice way to kind of cap how great Parity is for businesses that are listening to this. Because look, whatever your innovation is, if you're sitting here going, I'm in another industry, it's saying, well, how can I add value to my customer? How do I put power into their hands? And essentially that's what Parity is all about.
I hope the audience now has a better understanding of what Parity is and what the model it's all about. And this kind of knowledge will help you understand the project that we will touch now. So the context of the project is the Greater Birmingham and Solihull LEP has a pilot innovation program seeking to help local small businesses to tackle innovation challenges. And as a startup, we had our challenges. Stuart, would you like please to give a bit of context of where we're at back in March, and what were the challenges we were facing at that time?
I think the position we were in was a position that probably the average business person has found themselves in, is we had what we perceived to be a great product. We had the thing live, we had all the technology, we had all of the service, all of the processes in place, and yet we just wasn't sort of connecting with our customer. We were just sort of thinking to ourselves, how the hell do we get this thing off the ground? How do we sort of get this into the marketplace? How do we get this into the hands of the user? And I think as a team, we started asking ourselves the questions, which again, the average business person would ask themselves in this position is, what part of this service is the problem? Is it the messaging? Is it the branding? Is it the way that we're explaining it? Is it even the colors on the logo? Is it the way that we're sort of presenting ourselves over social media? And ultimately, it's difficult because it could be one of 100 things, or it could be all of those things at once. And it's how do we work out how to sort of start to address those problems if we don't even know what those problems are. Now, we were very fortunate to be within Birmingham and basically have access to this grant from the local enterprise partnership, because this gave us the opportunity to start to ask some of these questions and start to sort of provide us with some answers to allow us to sort of drive forward. And then from that, when we managed to get that grant, we essentially thought that market research was the way forward here, and ultimately that's where we came across Create and Propel, and with Courtney, who would basically start to answer those questions for us, or at least do some high quality market research where we can start to work out what some of these answers, work out what some of the answers are.
Yeah, I think just to echo that, I think it's great to actually start with that challenge, because this is where we're going to resonate with other people that are in similar shoes, not necessarily in financial services, but whatever industry they're in. I think it's important to remember this, there's so much research on how our attention spans as customers have just decreased to nothing. And I think the latest report that I saw said that our attention spans 6 seconds, which back in the day would have been a lot longer than that. And when you think about it, 6 seconds is no time at all. And so, really, if your message isn't right and if it isn't bang on in that amount of time, your customer's not going to go out of the way to try to understand what you're trying to tell them. And so there is this real big challenge for businesses across multiple industries, because not only have attention spans decreased, but the amount of content out there has increased exponentially. And the word that I always like to use for that is noise. There's just so much noise on there. And especially when we look at digital marketing in 2020, because everybody's online now, how do you make sure that you differentiate and clarify your message in a way that people are actually going to pay attention to? And I think it's nice, because if we put ourselves into the shoes, because we're both small businesses in ourselves, there's this really big need to just get your concept into the market. So as you guys were saying, you had the tools, you had everything, you wanted to go out there and get people to sign up. But what you're not thinking about in that time is is what I'm saying correct? Will somebody understand it? Will they react? And so there's this big challenge of making sure that if you're going to spend your money on marketing yourself, or your time or your resources or whatever it is your currency you're dealing with there, then are you using it wisely? And so you really need to make sure, whether you're a startup or you're a corporate or wherever you are, that you have this strong brand messaging platform that goes, this is how I talk about my brand in a way that's sexy to my customers. Not only am I looking at it from that perspective, but if there's 3 of you or 10 of you or 20 of you, is everybody aligned? Are they all saying the same thing? Because that's so important to making sure that you're cutting through the noise and really resonating with the people that matter.
Definitely, and that basically brings on to the sort of 2 key challenges that we were facing earlier in the year. And again, I think these challenges can be related to by any business owner, by anybody who's trying to develop innovative ideas and trying to get innovative ideas out into the marketplace. And I think what we'll do is go through these 2 challenges, and Courtney can spend a bit of time discussing what the market research found and how how we started to address those. The first one, which you can probably tell from this podcast alone, we was really struggling of how to simplify this kind of complex product. We had this relatively new concept that the average person, especially the average small business owner, had not heard anything about. We were trying to, we were all local currency and alternative currency experts, but what we were struggling with was trying to get to a point where the average business, over the even 6 seconds or the 30-second phone call that we were having with them, were able to sort of understand what it was. So the first sort of challenge was, how do we simplify that complex product or service? So Courtney, I think you could go through the kind of things that you found and how we started to address that.
Well, yeah. So, I think the first part of simplifying a complex product or concept or service, whatever we want to call that, is defining your language. And so to give a good example of something that we sought to find out during our research phase was, so how do we describe parity? Is it an alternative currency? Is it a local currency? Is it a marketplace? What is it? And so I think what's really important for businesses, no matter who you are, is making sure that you understand what words to use that your customers will understand. Because if you have 6 seconds, those 6 seconds need to be words that aren't alien to your customers. And then the second part is identifying your hook. So that's kind of looking at, what problem am I solving for my customers? And again, to give an example with Parity, one of the questions that we were looking at is, so Parity actually has multiple uses for the customers. It actually solves quite a few problems. But what's the biggest problem? What's the biggest shared problem that everybody can have as a universal hook to capture people's attention? So if you're scrolling through LinkedIn, to give a good context or a tangible application, someone goes, "Ooh, actually, yeah, I know what that is, and I want to learn more about what that particular hook is telling me." And then the third piece is make it relevant. So the guys will know we did a piece of work to build these customer profiles. So what we did was actually break SMEs in Birmingham down to 3 different customer profiles. And the purpose of doing that was to understand, what are the individual pains? So what are the things keeping up business owners in Birmingham at night? And what are their gains? What are the things that make them feel good? And so if you understand the words that you use, so the language, and your overall hook, then you can use this pains and gains messages in your marketing messaging, or when you're talking to somebody in a pitch, to go, look, we understand that you're going to be staying up at night thinking about these specific challenges. So for small businesses, overwhelmingly, it was cash flow, right? We knew that people were struggling to figure out how they were going to survive. And this was even pre-COVID that we were starting to have these conversations. And so we needed to make sure that we were talking about cash flow and other things that matter to businesses. And I suppose looking at, how do you actually go about defining those 3 elements is through research. You need to talk to the people that you're marketing to. And so what was great is, when I first started working with Parity, it was these 3 guys that were so intelligent about the world of alternative currencies. And they had clearly spent day in and day out just learning about the ins and outs of it. And so my job was to help them translate that into relatable and authentic language that businesses understood. So we went straight to the source. We said, what words would you understand? What keeps you up at night? You know, what can we say? What problem do you think this might solve? And overwhelmingly, people are very happy to share that information if you ask them. And I suppose the last bit of advice, and it's not just saying that because I am a brand consultant, is you need to bring in somebody external to help you bring this all together, because I'm sure the guys can say when you're in it day in and day out, you forget the lens of having that challenge to go, hold up, I don't know what that means. Can you explain that to me? And so whether you bring in a professional to come in and do the project for you, or you just talk to your partner or your friends or whoever it is, make sure that you bring in some external points of view to make sure it makes sense, because that's the biggest thing, is, does it make sense?
And that was like a crucial thing that we learned, was that where we were kind of bringing what we thought of as a solution to the market, what you showed us was actually go and find out what the challenges are and then bring that solution to those challenges. And I could really echo that advantage of having a third party come in. And again, this might relate to sort of business owners listening to this. You know, we were relatively skeptical about the idea of getting a market researcher to come and do market research on something that we thought we understood. But having you come in with that new lens, with that sort of new set of eyes on it, and to basically go to customers and say, I'm not with Parity, I'm a third party person, I just want to answer some questions. And you found it very easy to sort of get through the door, essentially, didn't you? People were happy to give you up to like half an hour of their time to talk about, you know, a concept which, you know, they was completely new to them. And I think we found that incredibly, you know, useful. The kind of the data that came off that was invaluable, essentially.
Yeah, well, I mean, I laugh because I'm thinking of an example in terms of, there was one prospect in particular that you guys have been trying to get in touch with for such a long time. And because I was completely third party to the process, I just called the business up and said, can I talk to you for 30 minutes? I ended up having an hour and a half conversation with that customer. And through that time was obviously able to get their opinion on all of these questions, but I was able to share more about your particular offering and at least, you know, plant that seed for you. So I always say it's mutually beneficial, because number one, you're getting into customers' heads, which is exactly what you want to be able to sell. But number two, you don't know what doors are going to open for you to have that follow-up at the end of the research, which is always good for me to know that you guys are going to have multiple uses out of that.
No, definitely. It was fantastic. And what that really allowed us to do was to understand what the market wanted, what the individual businesses wanted, what the language it was that they were speaking, what they related to, and even some of the things that sort of came back, you know, the ideas of like trading without cash. You know, prior to this, we were talking about it was a local currency and this is the benefits. And what came back was, hey, I can do trades without cash with Parity. It's a marketplace, you know, it's a network and marketplace which I can transact without cash. Which again, these are the things that were starting to relate to the business owners that we just wouldn't have come across on our own. It was something we'd gone too far down the rabbit hole of our own model that we just didn't understand. You know, we needed somebody to take a step back and say, hey, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? And that was the kind of the value of having, you know, you come in and do that. The second challenge, which and straight off the back of that, once we've kind of worked out how to simplify it, how to communicate it, and how to get that message across, the second challenge, which we didn't understand, and again is a challenge that is relevant to every business owner, regardless of what sector they're in, across the world, essentially, is once you have your product and service, and once you sort of know how to communicate, is where are these people that you want to communicate to? Where is the market? Where are the business owners or the customers that you want to sell to? And that was another part of the project which Create and Propel and Courtney really helped us with, was actually finding these people to allow us to start to promote our product to and get them into the know about what Parity was doing. So I don't know if you want to give us a bit more of your experiences of being part of that project and starting to work out, you know, where the customers were that we were trying to sell to.
Absolutely. So I guess the first challenge is, how do we talk about us? And then the second challenge, as you just mentioned, is, so where should we talk about ourselves and how do we actually reach people? And I will give credit where credit is due. This part of the project was done in collaboration with Greta Gagan from Digital Glue. But of course, happy to speak in this because there are some really simple ways that you can tackle this question. So let's go back to that research that I just talked about with regards to how do we talk about our offering. Well, if you're going to be asking people those questions, you might as well ask them the marketing questions. So instead of taking assumptions on where you think you should market your product, because I think that's a real big challenge with a lot of entrepreneurs, is they go, well, every morning I wake up at 6 a.m. and the first place I go is LinkedIn. So every one of my customers is going to do that too. And that is not necessarily the case. You need to ask your customers those questions. So whilst I was asking them, how do we talk about Parity? The other question I was asking them is, so how do we get it in front of you? Where would you actually pay attention? What channels and resources are you using? And what you'll find is there's a huge difference from what desk research or assumptions will lead you to versus what local people are doing. Because what was interesting, one of the findings I think that we found through Parity is that people really wanted there to be some sort of physical directory or a flyer or something that would feel very traditional. They were still ready to access that kind of collateral from a marketing perspective when you're talking about something like Parity. And there was a lot of different other examples, definitely using some big names or some influencers in the area. And very naturally, where we would have gone is, let's just hammer LinkedIn, but that's not the only platform, and we wouldn't have known that if we hadn't asked people, how can I market to you? Because they're more than willing to tell you that information. And I would say, if you are that entrepreneur that's talked to your customers and knows what channels you're going to access, then there's one thing that you need to consider, which is breaking it down into awareness channels versus conversion channels. And Stuart, I know that you guys will have more to say on this specific piece, but in order for somebody to convert and sign up, they have to know who you are first. They're never just going to find out who you are and sign up in one go, unless it's some crazy great product that you have to have now. So you need to make sure you're thinking about, well, how do I market my product or service in a way that gets people just to know who I am? So our goal is awareness. And then how do I remarket to them so that I get them to convert? And so that really was looking at you guys from a sales funnel or a sales pipeline perspective, is what's all the individual touch points, and the channels that we're doing things on are going to differ depending on where that is. So just make sure that you're thinking about it from both of those lenses as well.
Absolutely.
And the position we were in right at the beginning of this project was probably a similar position that the average sort of entrepreneur was in. We literally thought we could turn the website, make the website live, and then people would come to us, come through the door and sign up. And the projects with yourselves allowed us to develop this idea of funnels and a sort of marketing funnel to sort of raise awareness, and then a sales funnel to start to bring them in. And we're using these different channels, you know, social media. We're also using local referrals. We're using local influencers, local media to start to raise awareness about what Parity was, what it was doing, what our values were, why we were doing it. To really just plant those seeds in the heads of customers or potential customers. So when we were going to them directly to say, hey, we think this is great for you, we've started to find that people had heard of us, that people were aware of what we were up to. And that just made that whole conversation so much easier. It just meant that businesses understood that what we were trying to do was something that was beneficial for the local area. They knew we were local guys. We weren't just an anonymous call center from India trying to sell insurance or whatever it might be. And I think that really allowed us to build the kind of trust that we needed to develop that alternative currency within the local area.
Absolutely. And I will say just one final point on that, which is so relevant, and I didn't even think about it till you were just bringing that point up, is especially for people listening that are from a B2B business. So your focus is on selling to other businesses versus consumers. That pipeline or that lead time is going to be a lot longer than it is for selling a product, which a lot of people will know. And so you need to make sure that you are really investing in that awareness channel, as you mentioned, because once people knew who you were, that sign up process felt a lot shorter than it did when you were trying to do both of those objectives at one time. So you will reap the reward of investing in awareness, because you might not immediately get all the revenue you're looking for, but down the line, you will find that your sales are a lot more efficient and effective.
Yeah, and I'd like just to add a minor comment on the nature of Parity and this kind of network model in which it's about membership. So it's not a one-time off purchase that then you forget about it. This project and really understanding what your customer, your prospect wants, it helps you, on the kind of selling process, but at the same time also to increase the engagement with the network and having members that do actually engage more with the community and understanding what they need to kind of make that extra step towards the kind of activities in the network, in this case in Parity. So we went through somehow what was the project all about, researching and kind of identifying this persona and the market routes. What were the development to Parity at the end of this project, Stuart? Which concrete actions we took at the time?
And as you started to gather, you know, the whole market research project was incredibly valuable, and we made a series of concrete changes to our offer and to our product to encourage more uptake within the local market. The first one was Courtney identified that because it was an alternative currency and it was a new innovative product, businesses were unsure about taking a risk of joining up, you know, to signing up. It was something they had not heard of, so it was definitely an element of risk of participating. And prior to this project, you know, we were doing what every small business owner is trying to do, is basically maximize the amount of money coming through the door. So there was a charge to sign up and to get involved. So not only was business owners taking a risk to use the product, but they also had to obviously pay to do that. So the first thing that kind of came out with it was the idea of lowering the barrier to participating within Parity. So I think one of the things that Courtney raised was the idea of doing like a freemium offer where business owners could try it out before they used it. And I think one of the particular things you said, Courtney, was the easiest way to explain this product was by people just using it, by doing the first transaction. You know, get them on board and get them to do a transaction using a zero interest credit line. And again, we found that incredibly useful. One of the next things that came back from Courtney's research was the idea that the business owners wanted more control. Prior to the research, businesses could just receive a phone call from anybody else in the network asking for their most expensive product for the local currency. Now, what business owners were saying was, look, we want to participate, we want to use this to generate leads, we want to participate in the local area, but we want control over what we're offering to the local currency. So one of the suggestions was developing more of like an e-commerce experience where business owners can post offers within a marketplace. So one of the crucial developments over the last 3 to 6 months has been to develop a specific marketplace platform where business owners can post offers in the local currency, or they can post offers where they're happy to do half local currency, half pounds. And we even found business owners wanted just to post free stuff. So we've got a bunch of businesses are offering free consultations, free advice, free guidance. There's a way of just meeting new people locally and using Parity as a way of extending their networks. And then the final concrete thing that came out of this research was, on the flip side of that marketplace development, was business owners prior to it just didn't know what was available. And strangely enough, that they just didn't want to ring up a company and start negotiating over what they could buy and what they couldn't buy, and have that sort of awkward conversation with somebody they didn't really know. So an advantage of this marketplace was that business owners, you know, on a Friday night at 10 o'clock with a glass of wine, they could actually look at the things that are available and say, you know what, Monday morning I'll buy that. And that was the kind of thing that wasn't available prior to doing that research, and again came completely out of what Courtney did and the findings she found when she was engaging with them.
Well, I think, you know, to really sum all of that up as well, we came at it with the objective of obviously being able to articulate what Parity was in a way that you guys could then sell it and market it. But off of that one, and, you know, it wasn't a massive research project, it was quite an efficient program rather. We got so much information that changed Parity quite exponentially from where it was at the beginning. And so I would say to any business owner that's thinking, I want to do some market research, but I don't know what the value would be to my business. Well, I think that's a true testament to what you guys got off of the back of that, because not only did you come out with a brand messaging platform and tons of other things, but you really did make changes to Parity along the way that made your sales process a lot more effective. And if you are a small business, you can adapt more effectively than some of the larger players are. So there's so much benefit in talking to your customers and getting that information, because not only will you change the way you talk about your product or service, but you will change the way you offer it, where you sell it, the channels that it's available on. All of those things come into how can we get somebody to actually purchase from our organization.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about kind of using these findings to implement and develop the business further. But to go back to the kind of title of the podcast, which is about communications, and I think part of the audience can relate to us when we say we were completely marketing amateurs. And so a project like that, yes, it helps you develop the business, but in terms of marketing and communication, how do you implement that findings once you have these tons of guidelines which really set the direction, how you start to move forward towards that? So I don't know, Courtney, if you when I give a bit of a generic advice on how businesses in general can use a project like that to help their strategy, really.
Yeah, well, I think it might help if I give some examples, and then we can obviously get Stuart to come in and talk about, what that actually looked like for you guys. And I would say the key thing is that just because you don't have somebody with the title marketing manager in your business doesn't mean you shouldn't be marketing yourself or prioritizing that, because, hey, that's how you're going to get sales. And you don't have to have a degree to be able to do this. It's just taking these quick steps that any business can implement. And so the first part is, what we ended up with at the end of our program was you had research insight documents, you had customer profiles, you had your brand guidelines, you had a marketing strategy, you had all of these things. And then there was okay, so now what? And I would say the next step for any business is to take your big, scary strategy document and just break it down into a tactical plan that says, in January, February, March, April, May, etc., on week 1, 2, 3, and 4, based off of that strategy, what individual steps do we need to take to be able to achieve that objective? So on week 1, we're going to have 3 Facebook posts, and those are going to be at these specific times. And this is where we're going to create the posts, and this is how we're actually going to put those to life. So it's just making it feel a lot less daunting than a big overarching objective. Break it down into actions that you guys have there. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, that's the kind of process we took. We found ourselves taking the big, scary marketing document, and we turned it into tangible actions. We had a spreadsheet with on a month and a weekly, broken into a weekly basis. So we knew the types of activities that we would be taking each week to try and start to communicate that. We knew which platforms we were trying to communicate across. We developed a Trello board with all the local influencers that we were sort of wanting to target, and we sort of moved them down essentially a funnel. Whenever we spoke to them, what's the next action, what's the follow-up, and that led to us having invites for guest blogs locally. And again, it was all part of this sort of implementation of a strategy. You have to take the idea that you're going to communicate across social media and actually sort of have a time frame for doing that. Otherwise, the weeks turn into months, and you find yourself that you haven't been out there and communicated it. And that's really what we found. What's become most effective was turning it into that sort of tangible action plan.
Yeah, well, I think there's that old idiom, how do you eat an elephant bite by bite? And really that's what it's about, is if your elephant is getting 100 new customers on board and you've got 12 months to do that, then divide 100 by 12. I certainly won't do the maths on here. But then, month by month, it feels a lot more achievable than just looking at that big goal. So that'll be the first part. And I would say number 2, which we had to have a conversation about as well for you guys on how that looks, is roles and responsibilities. So if we look at, marketing agencies, they usually have things down to like a fine-tuned process. But the reason why maybe businesses internally don't achieve as much as agencies do is because there's a lack of clarity on who's responsible for what. And what you can never do, which you guys will be able to attest to, is just say, okay, we'll all just split it individually and figure it out, because then nobody gets it done. So number 1 is, if you don't have somebody specifically whose title is marketing, just create an unofficial title of marketing manager or director. And what that does is make sure that you have at least one person whose responsibility is to make sure everybody's accountable. But number 2, you need to make sure that you distribute all of those actions in your tactical plan equally amongst everyone. So it's not just riding on one person, because guess what? One person's probably going to fail, because we're all human. If we split it out, it means we're all accountable moving forward.
And again, that was something we definitely didn't know prior to doing this project was that, again, like you quite rightly said, our marketing strategy was sort of pushed across all three of us. It wasn't really clear who was doing it, who was responsible for doing it, how do we drive it forward. So off the back of your suggestions, we appointed Matteo as our marketing director. And although at the beginning he was unsure about that, it was something he had a background in. He really has excelled because he now has a role that he has to commit himself to. He knows that he needs to get X amount of social media posts out a week. He knows that he needs to speak to these people locally. And he kind of knows that's his responsibility. So when we're having our team meetings and we're asking about marketing, ultimately the buck stops with him. And then on the flip side of that, it means he can come back to us and say, Stuart, there's a blog that needs to be written with this organization and it's your job to do it. And it means there's somebody driving that forward. And hopefully in the next sort of week or so, we're having somebody join us that's going to be under Matteo, who we can actually start to put some of these tasks onto, because that was a crucial element. And again, one of the things business owners, I imagine, have found themselves in this situation many times is once you know you've got to do a marketing strategy and working out who's responsible, but do you outsource that? Do you just put it all over to a marketing agency and let them get on with it and hope that they deliver the sort of things that you want to do? I think the crucial lesson we found was that once we had kind of internalized it and assigned a role and a responsibility to it, we kind of knew which jobs needed to be done. So if we were in a position where we were like, okay, we're not very good at the PR, let's say outsource that particular package of work. And I think it was a lesson that I'd learned through this project. It's not something I would have known prior to doing this project about. That's a crucial way of sort of tackling the marketing needs of your business.
Absolutely. And I will say, as a professional, obviously representing the marketing industry, is knowing that when you're having a conversation with a startup or a younger business, there is a distrust, I think, because a lot of small businesses, they don't have a lot of cash to spend and they really don't want to part with it. So it's difficult to have that conversation to justify, well, this is why you should outsource that specific task. And what you guys can attest to is, because you've done it yourselves, now you know for the future what would be a worthy investment versus what you can just crack on with internally. And I think that's key, is actually giving yourself time as a business to try it. You might fail, you might succeed. And if you do succeed, great, because now you know, if I'm going to put my money somewhere else, I know that it's because either I can't do it or I just don't like it. And both of those are valid reasons to outsource those types of activities. And then I suppose just last, in terms of general advice, is don't forget that you need to constantly create content. So in order to keep yourself front of mind, you do need to be looking at always having something to say to keep people engaged. And I know that the guys with this particular project, without going into too much detail, what we found is, in order to bring their marketing plan to action, the one that they spent time breaking down, if they realized they needed 3 Facebook posts a week, well, who was going to create those, and what can we do instead of just making noise? What can we say that's actually interesting? So that led to things like the creation of an animation and an illustration and other things, just to keep it engaging and fun, and to make sure that if they're going to spend their time scheduling all this activity, that it has something interesting to say off the back of that, which I think was a nice way to go. You start with that scary elephant strategy, you break it down into bite-sized chunks, and then from there, it feels a lot easier to just pump that content out.
No, very much so. And as you said, we've sort of developed a video, we started to promote ourselves more efficiently. And I think that one of the crucial things that came out of this was understanding that really the social media platforms and these things should form part of the sales strategy. It shouldn't just be noise. You shouldn't be adding to the noise that already exists. If you're posting things out there, it is to raise awareness about your product and trying to get people to come to you and ask more questions. And again, we're starting to find some successes now where essentially we call it sort of participating within the conversation over social media. When businesses are talking about local issues or they're talking about things that are going on within Birmingham, just being there, having our own opinion and just sort of putting it out there means that people are becoming aware of us. I literally had a call yesterday with a company who, I rang kind of semi out of the blue, and they'd heard about us through social media. He'd seen us on social media, and just that made that whole conversation so much easier. He trusted us. He knew we were local guys, and and it's a company that hopefully within the new year will be joining our network, and it will be a company that other companies can spend their local currency with.
No, yeah, and in terms of a direct experience, I think to kind of give a tip to everybody trying a bit of marketing activities, what Courtney was saying, and Stuart too, about trying and not be fear to try, and also be systematic when trying. So the kind of A/B testing we implemented for a while, try stuff, see what goes well, what not, and then you will have a better understanding of somehow developing the strategy further. So in terms of strategy, I think it's worth mentioning that we didn't set up straight away a 1-year plan, but we did a kind of first 3 months to kind of understanding what we were good at and what was working, and then developing on top of that based on kind of what we found successful. So really try it out, understanding what you're good at, and then do that, really. Yeah. So I think we touched a lot of things today, and I hope everybody listening will find it useful. I think now we can move a bit towards somehow the lessons to conclude on this podcast. And there are both company and personal lessons that Stuart, you and Parity have learned. So in terms of takeaway message, what would you say it's yours from this project?
I think the crucial thing that we did learn was about talking to your customers. That we know before this project started, we had successfully brought sort of 6-7 businesses on, but we didn't really understand their motivations, why they joined, what they wanted from us. And I think what this lesson, what the project really taught us was getting out there, understanding them, understanding what they want, and essentially understanding your market. We made some significant changes to the way the business was being even presented and the way that we did business, based on the feedback from our local marketplace, by the people that were using it. And I think that's crucial to any business, even if they're not implementing innovative ideas, is to sort of understand what it is that your market wants. And then on top of that, and as you sort of got from the sort of last 20 minutes or so, is really developing a very systematic marketing and sales strategy, really understanding breaking the product down, making it into messaging that businesses understand, and then start to feed that into a sales funnel, raising awareness and then bringing them in for conversion. And I think those are two sort of major lessons that, we weren't really very good at prior to the project, and we feel much more comfortable with now.
Yeah, I mean, I would say in terms of lessons learned, for me, I suppose one is sort of wider to say, do not undervalue traditional methods of communication. That echoes a little bit about what you were saying, Stuart, about listening to your customer. But, picking up the phone can sometimes be a much more effective way of getting in front of people than just relying on email or social media to get your message out there. And so use every way of talking to people as possible. And especially in 2020, people like talking to another human being. So never undervalue that. And then I suppose as a marketing professional, you really need to think about building a realistic tool for a startup. And I think a lot of times in the agency space or as freelancers, we have a specific set way of doing things, but that's not always going to be relevant for a team of 3 people who don't have a marketing manager or a marketing director internally. And so you need to make sure if these guys are investing their cash in you, that you're creating something that they're genuinely going to understand how to use, that you're not creating necessarily the biggest elephant out there, that it is an elephant they're going to be able to buy into. So yeah, just looking at it from that perspective.
Brilliant. And so the podcast was about overcoming the difficulties in communicating innovative ideas. In this framework, in a nutshell, what would be your advice to all the entrepreneurs listening, or people who might have another job or looking into developing their own idea and somehow making that idea a reality? What should they do to kind of be successful in that?
I think, the innovative idea that we brought to the marketplace was very challenging. And I think one of the things I would say is, don't give up, essentially. Like, you might have 100 people and 97 of them won't understand it and won't be interested. But those 3 that does pique their interest, that's worth it. It's worth sort of having all of those rejections just to get those 3 positive sort of bits of feedback. So, what we were finding was ringing up companies saying, we've got this local currency, and some business owners were like, what are you talking about? Like, why would I use a local currency? How can it be local? And I think just realizing that when you bring in something innovative to the marketplace, there is a chunk of the market that will never understand your product. You can give them all the marketing, all the awareness you'll ever give them, and they're just literally of a generation that are just not interested in what you're trying to sell. But don't let that sort of put you off. Like, still drive at it, still work out who your customer personas are, who the people are that would be more open to these innovative ideas, and start to focus on that. Another thing is, like, don't feel like that because you're doing something innovative that you're the first person on the planet to do this. We took a lot of good ideas from other companies that were doing things similar, and we sort of molded them into what we were doing ourselves. You won't be the first person in the world to come up with these ideas, and there's lots of some of the ideas around the marketplace we borrowed from companies in America. We like the way they were presenting their products and the way they structured their marketplace, and that sort of really spurred some of our own thinking about developing our product. And then the sort of final thing, which is what we were obviously getting at in this podcast, is just try and make it accessible. That it might be an incredibly innovative thing that saves the company thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds, but if they're not going to access it, then there's no saving to be made. So it might be incredibly valuable, but get them to use it first, get them to realize how valuable it is. So don't worry about trying things like freemium and getting them on for free and getting them sort of offers and such things. Like, try and make the thing accessible to the marketplace that you're in, because ultimately you'll have those first people convert, and you'll have those first businesses try it out, and you'll get some sort of steam behind it, and then the fruits of your labor can come at a later date.
Yeah, and I would say, again, just to keep it generic as well, is number one, innovation should be led from your customer. So I echo exactly what you just said, Stuart. But I guess from a messaging perspective, there's this really want and desire to focus on the novelty of what my product does. But unless you're talking about something that's specifically relevant to your customer, people aren't going to buy it. So make sure that innovation and the way you market it constantly is led from your customers' pains and gains. Number two, do not ever go to market with a confusing message. You can spend £1 million on Facebook, but if the ad you're sending out there is confusing, you're never going to get the return you want. So take some time to challenge yourself, get that fresh pair of eyes and a perspective on there to make sure it makes sense before you push it out there. And the third thing is, no matter what size your business is, you want to make sure that you're investing in the things that are going to build equity in your brand. So never focus on just the product or service, because guess what? Your competitors can steal that. What they can't steal from you is your brand and all of the trust that is built within that. So even from day one, never just focus on your product or service. Build equity in the people behind it, the driving purpose and message behind that, so that at the end of the day, your logo bears weight, so you can diversify your product offering from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Courtney, we've learned so much from you. One final comment from me, it's be consistent, as you told us many times. Once you develop that, really believe in what you're doing, be consistent, don't somehow change too fast, and stay within the framework you define, and people will start to relate to that, really, and potentially consequently buying from you what you're selling. So thanks so much for joining me, and for everybody who is listening to this podcast. Really appreciate your contribution, both Stuart and Courtney. Before we wrap it up, where people can find about Parity, Stuart, and how can they get in touch?
Parity's got a website with its marketplace on, which is parity.uk. And the marketplace is available for the public to have a look through. They can see all the products and services that are available, and see how their products or service could fit within this marketplace. And we're also, of course, on social media, so Parity_network on Twitter, and also LinkedIn and Instagram.
Perfect. And Courtney, same question for you, where people can find about Create Propel, and if someone wants to develop a similar project, how can they contact you to find out more?
Absolutely. Well, I will say you can always find me on LinkedIn, which is /in/Courtney R. Patrick, but I am also on YouTube, and I do have a lot of different videos that are completely free to watch. They give you lots of tips and tricks on things that you can implement in your business now, but you can find both of those links, as well as get in touch with me directly through my website, which is www.createandpropel.com. I have a contact form on there, and every single new client is entitled to a free 30 30-minute consultation. So even if you've heard this podcast and you just want to ask me a question without any indication of starting a project with me, that's fine. I'm always happy to have those kinds of conversations and help however I can. So just go to my website, which is again www.createandpropel.com.
Perfect. Thanks so much for listening. Stay safe.